Okay, so where do personality disorders come from, right? So big word, big fancy word you can use at the water cooler at work if you want. Etiology, or sometimes it's said etiology. The etiology of personality disorders, which is just a fancy way of saying, where do they come from? What's their starting point? Bottom line is you can't say, oh, it's nature or oh, it's nurture. It's a little bit of both. It's not always trauma. It's not always genetics. It's a little bit of both. So in terms of genetics, some studies show that genetics make up more than 60% of what contributes to the likelihood of there being a personality disorder. So it's very high. There's a lot in terms of genetics here. One study found that there might be a malfunctioning gene that is linked to obsessive compulsive personality disorder specifically. So there's an idea that with that specific personality disorder, there's one particular gene that malfunctions. Not that that's the entire cause, but a part of it. Also, aggression, anxiety, and fear. We know that all of those have genetic links and can play a role in personality disorders. So those are certain sort of traits, you might think of them, that can be part of the configuration of a personality disorder. And those all have those genetic roots. Now, on the environmental and experiential side, we see that there are these longitudinal studies. So that's a study that follows one group of people over a long period of time. And it shows that childhood experiences do play an important role in, that should say, personality development. We know, for example, that there is a very strong link between childhood sexual trauma and borderline personality disorder. It's not a one-to-one, it's not a guarantee, but it does appear that if there's a genetic predisposition there, and then there's this particular environmental factor, that seems to be quite a setup for borderline personality disorder. Children who experience verbal abuse were 3 times more likely to have borderline narcissistic or obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Now, down here at the bottom, I've got this note. If you haven't heard of epigenetics, it's something really important to understand, something that we've just come to understand within the last couple of decades when it comes to understanding human development and genetics. Epigenetics is the study of gene expression modified by environmental factors. In other words, the way a gene gets expressed isn't automatic, set in stone, but certain environmental factors, it's like it turns these little switches on the gene off and on within the DNA, on the gene off and on, which then affects environmental factors. They've done studies, for example, of Holocaust survivors, their children, and their grandchildren, and they can see how the effects of the trauma of being in the Holocaust affected gene expression and how that then got passed down generation to generation. Now, it's not a permanent thing. The switches can be turned back off or on. There's probably a very strong epigenetic dynamic at work in the creation of a personality disorder. Genetics plus environment and experience.